What's up, besties? My name is Ursula, and in this video I'm going to show you how I painted one of my recent sculptures, specifically one that's not even on this shelf. I should have thought that through. Oh wait, I did think it through. Here she is. It's a Cthulhu sculpture. She is pretty close to the description in the Call of Cthulhu story, except she's a she because hell yeah, women represent. And she has no legs because a sea space elder god should have way more tentacles. Tentacles superior to legs, at least if you're living in sea space. She also gets a staff because she needs more spell power because she's the great priest and she's gonna need to do some spells. So I gave her a couple little changes. I'm gonna cover how to paint the bone here. There's also a little blue whale bone skull here to show how, that's the most biggest extant animal on the planet, and Cthulhu's really big. So that's for scale. That's how big she is in real life because she's real. I'm going to show you how to paint the sinew and bone and the light and the shadow and the blending. I will be combining my 2D techniques I've learned from oil painting with light and shadow, and I'll be smooshing it together with some 3D mini painting techniques to form a Voltron of blending power and lighting. I'm going to cover some rim lighting and some source lighting. I'm going to cover how I made mistakes and just decisions on the fly because I'm super lazy and I don't want to strip all the paint off and start over, so I just paint over my mistakes. And that's probably something you should do, or maybe you shouldn't do, but like Bob Ross told us, like, happy mistakes, and these are really happy. So let's go ahead and watch some of my techniques, and maybe we can both learn things along the way. I can always learn more. I hope you find this interesting and fun. Let's go paint the things. Let's go do it.
Alright, here is my Cthulhu sculpture. She's been primed with Citadel brand primer in the color of Xandri dust. The color of your primer can work for or against you. You'll want to pick a color that fits with your overall palette. What super duper matters is that the primer is made for minis. You absolutely wouldn't want your details to get all mucked up with thick paint, so don't use something like patio furniture primer. This is a sanding stick. It is for sanding all of my mistakes off that I can now see since it's primed. I don't recommend that you sand things after you prime because you're going to sand off all the primer, but I have bad vision, so this is really helping me see all the little things that I've messed up. And I can touch it up with brush on primer. I'll be using Warpaint's brand acrylic paints made for Warhammer minis. I'll be using these with a wet palette, which looks like this. If you want to learn more about wet palettes, there are literally millions of white people who will not shut up about it. So please have another nerd explain it to you. I am not in the mood. I don't really have a set plan when I'm choosing the colors for one of my figures. I kind of like to just play around with everything and see what looks best. Here I'm just painting on some various greens that are offered by this company. I know I want a desaturated green, but I don't know how light or dark I want it to be. Cthulhu doesn't really have an official green, so this is just according to my own tastes. I'm using a little bit of water as my medium so that these will dry really quickly and I can paint over them later. I'm trying a little bit more of a bluish green here for the ocean, and I'm immediately regretting it. I'm wiping away the color with the same brush that had the color, and I'm just painting it very thinly and spreading it out. And now I'm coming back with a lighter green to paint over that awful bluish teal green. You might notice how easy it is to paint the light right over that teal green and lighten it up. You should always paint from dark to light and thin to thick because trying to darken paint can make it really muddy and weird. This is all, of course, if you're using a medium like water or something that slows the dry time. Once it's dry, you can darken whatever you want to darken. For this stage, I am using my most abused brushes. I've got this piece of shit, this extremely stiff, bristly guy, and whatever the fuck this is. I've chosen to use all of my worst, most damaged brushes on this stage, which is the first coat, so that I can mash them into all of these crevices without worrying about ruining a new brush. Someday I will learn how to airbrush so I don't have to do this, but that day is not today. All of these bristles have been smushed into every nook and cranny. Chat, what is a cranny? My past sculpting self has ruined it for my future or present painting self. What I mean by this is it is a nightmare to get into all of these little areas with the brush. And this is what I get for not being much of a planner. For instance, how am I supposed to even get to this piece right here? Like this motherfucker right here. You unpainted son of a fuck. Oh, don't worry, I will paint your blank ass, you piece of garbage. Oh hey, remember when I said I never make plans? Well, I lied. I've drawn up these plans where I'm going to have maybe her hands glow and her tentacles are going to have black on them. And maybe the wings will have black with a gradient up to dark greenish gray. Just as in this picture right here. Yeah, so there's the plan. I finished applying all the basic colors to everywhere I need to, and the gray for the black here. These won't be the final colors on the wings, they are just sort of marking where I will paint. What I do want to do is make her tentacles stand out on her face. As per my dope drawing, I might make them glow just like her hands. This little structure is where I tested out some of my gradients. On this left panel, I use dry brushing. It's very rough dry brushing because I did it with a pretty large bristle brush. This next panel in the middle was done with water. And I'm honestly super impressed with how smoothly it blended. For this right panel, I used a medium called Flow Aid Additive by Liquitex. The blending didn't really go as smoothly as I wanted it to, but if I mix it with some of the other methods, it might work. I've mixed a forest green with her overall flesh tone of sage green to get this shadow that I'll be blending into the areas I want to fade into the back. I'm also going to use it here on her lower tentacles where the sage green will transition to the black. This is sort of a first run of the blending, so I'm not paying too much attention to how well I'm applying it. The way I usually blend is I go back and forth between the light and dark until I get the effect that I want. And since I'm using this mostly as the transition color, it will probably get covered up by the black and the sage. And now for the black. I'm applying it here just roughly where I want it to end and where it will transition to the light sage. I've used the dark green as a marker for where I want the transition to occur. I'm using the Flow Aid medium here on the black so that it's not just pure thick black acrylic. On the front tentacle you can see how the black is dried, but you can also see the sage green through where the little wrinkles and cracks are. I'll be coming back with a second coat of the black so that I can fix that. And here's how she's looking so far with the first coats. I mixed the forest green, the sage green, and a little black to muddy it up so I can make this transition color. I'm moving back and forth between the two greens to do the wet blending. The two greens mix really well, so I don't have to clean my brush in between applying each one. I can just go over and back and forth really easily. I'm also using my finger to blend, which isn't recommended, but shut up, it's how I painted this. Alright, let's make her hands glow. I'm starting with a very light color called Afterglow. This will be the brightest color of all of the greens. I'm not doing any blending at all. I'm just trying to see where I want the colors to begin and end. I'm also just testing out if this is the right yellow, if I want to use something with more green tint in it. I'm just playing around here with color. I'm just using barely any water as the medium here so that it can dry really fast and it's really thin. This is going to let me paint over it later if I really hate it. This next color is called Electric Lime. I'm using another one of my garbage brushes here because there's a lot of texture on the fingers and I don't want to worry about ruining a nice brush when I'm just slapping on some paint to figure out colors. This next color is called Rainforest or Leafy Green. I don't remember which one I used here. I'm doing just a tiny bit of blending here just to see how the colors go together. Honestly, at this point, I don't know if I'm convinced that glowing hands for Cthulhu is really the right choice. I mean, on one hand, lols, she should be casting spells because she's like an evil priest. On the other hand, maybe her intentions are just too evil for glowy powers. It doesn't matter though. Nothing matters. Nothing's permanent. Here's her completed glow, and I'm not sure if I should have gone further up the arm, but I do want to leave that arm blank for another plan I have. And that plan involves runes that are actually going to say something in a little alphabet that I made up. If you like cryptograms, maybe you can solve it. Originally in the sculpting phase, I was going to carve the runes into her forearm, but it wasn't looking too good, so I thought I would do it with paint. Enough of that though, let's get to her staff. I've moved on here to a very fine brush that is in very good shape, and it is for these tiny details. I've put a few coats of red on, and I've put the basic beige bone color down. And now with the tiny brush, I'm just trying to separate the bone color from the sinew color. I've got really shaky hands for reasons, and that makes this process really difficult for me. I'm trying to clean up here where the sinew goes behind the bone, and I'm about to really mess things up. I should have stopped. I should have stopped while I was ahead, right here. God damn it, now I gotta come back with the red. Okay, just be careful. Don't mess this up. Breathe slowly. Nope, now I grab some of the wet bone color and I'm making a really big mess. I'm just gonna move on to something else. Bones are not just a flat color of beige, so I'm gonna add some shadow here. Bones are also very textured, so I'm not painting very smoothly. I'm adding a little bit of blotchiness. The deliberate unevenness is going to give them a much more natural feel. And now that I've got a shadow on the underside of the circle of bones, I'm going to add some highlights with a lighter beige. Now on to all of her wounds. Once again, I'm using a crappy brush because there is so much texture in all of these little circles. I really had no idea what I was doing here, so I just started with some basic colors of innards and offal and intestines and that sort of thing. I absolutely love gory practical effects and just the viscera of horror movies, so I'm just keeping that in mind while choosing my colors here. I wanted these parts of her to be really gross and really infected and really diseased. I know it's not canon for Cthulhu to have diseased skin or look like she's sick, but I've always kind of thought of her as like this bringer of pestilence and death. Toward the end of Call of Cthulhu, Lovecraft's got this kind of silly idea for her. Her actual desire is to bring about new ways for men to kill other men. She wants total mayhem, total annihilation of mankind, except for her cultists. She's going to need them to stay alive and speak to them in dreams and tell her all of her rituals so that she can awaken again. So I was kind of thinking, what better way than to add to the mayhem and chaos than bringing disease and something disgusting, some sort of illness to mankind. So I've given her lots of open wounds to spread her contagion. Peak rotmaxing. I've put down some flesh color and then highlighted it with a beigeish, yellowish color to bring out more illness, and now I'm adding sort of a blood red and blending it back in with a pinkish color. The bright fleshy tones are looking a bit abrupt against her muted green skin. So to fix this, I need to add a brown wash over the top of them, and this is going to pull them down to her desaturated palette. I'm just going to add a little more of the color before I do that. And here comes the wash. It's like an iodine color, and it's filling in all of the little fleshy wrinkles really well. It's also grossifying these pus-filled things that are inside of her wound. Washes are really great for this. They set off the highlights of the higher parts and they sink into the deeper parts, and they just really make things look disgusting when you want them to. I'm coming back here with a very light beige to add just a little bit more highlights to the high parts. And now I'm going to spread this wash over into the green parts of her skin so that it's going to pull all of the wound colors into the greens. I'm putting the wash on a bit thick when I hit the larger divots so that when it dries, it's going to have some really nice dark tones in those dents. I'm also switching back and forth between that iodine colored wash and a military green wash. Skipping ahead, I've added all the flesh tones to most of her wounds, and again I'm coming back with the wash to go over them and pull all the colors together. Yeah, this is looking pretty gross. This wash pretty much dries exactly like you're seeing it wet, maybe slightly less gloss. I've grabbed a slightly bigger brush so that I can load way more wash onto it here at the end, but not so big that it won't like squish into the wrinkles. It does help to have a brush small enough that you can just sort of mush into the wrinkles so you can get all the wash in there. So now that I'm looking at all of her disease done and her glowy hands, I don't like the glowy hands. Usually I love the contrast of light and dark, but the light doesn't really go with her. She's a dark priest. She's evil. She's here to fuck shit up. Why would she bring the light from somewhere like a void where no light shines? You know what? I'm doing it. I'm painting black over it. I don't care. The plan I've got for her runes is going to make this all make sense. In fact, I have prepared the following remarks. Thank you, autism. For a long time, and I'm elderly, so I mean a long ass time, I've been obsessed with the concept of fictional characters reaching into some sort of evil abyss, a kind of black, inescapable void, like your butthole. Sorry. Whether that void be a literal or figurative abyss isn't super significant. It's the effect on the character's rectitude that preoccupies me, and I'm constantly regurgitating this visualization, which is blackened extremities, of this concept in my art. The abyss itself depends on each character's story, but it usually represents an infinite source of all that is negative. Evil, hatred, despondency, rage, despair, sadness, cruelty. It's basically a black hole of everything light and pure and moral and happy. Once you've passed the event horizon, no good can escape. That sort of thing. Usually, the characters in my art are cult leaders or cultists or demons or gods of something dark. So naturally, they're drawn to the negativity. And obviously, just about everything I've created has been heavily inspired by Lovecraft's stories. So you can see how this whole evil abyss obsession fits right in. When someone or something dips into the abyss and capitulates to the negativity, it attacks and consumes the last of their probity. Their will and their souls and their minds begin to die from the inundating dark corruption, as does their physical self. Even if they're God, they're unable to contain so much darkness within, and the decay metastasizes to their extremities, which become inflicted with gangrenous rot, and their dying flesh turns black. And there you go, my reason for painting over her glow. Or maybe it just kind of looks rad. Whatevs. White acrylics can be really chalky and lumpy, but this golden brand is really good stuff, just like it says on the bottle. Officially. I'm still going to mix it with Flow Aid for this next part. First, I measured the space I had on her forearm, and I wrote out my runes on a piece of paper that would fit in that space. I patted some painter's tape against my shirt to get rid of the sticky, and I stuck the paper right next to where I wanted to paint. I took a retracted ballpoint pen tip and scratched one rune into her forearm really lightly. I wound up really hating the pen tip thing, so I decided to just freehand it right on her forearm. I wound up doing this several times because I was not happy with the first outcome. I'm using the background color to cut into my mistakes and erase them. If the background's a gradient, fixing this is like punching yourself in the nuts. Here, I used electric lime to dry brush over the top of the runes. This is to give the effect that the light is coming from inside her and glowing outward. And I go over the runes one more time with white. Yeah, I know I said all that stuff about reaching into the dark abyss, but shut up. I'm also dry brushing a little OSL that's coming from the runes. I wanted to add some star charts to the scrolls on her staff so that her cultists could know when the stars were aligned. I just made the constellations up on the spot because they're all made up. Astrology is stupid. Now I'm adding a soft wash to the scrolls so that they look more aged. Just like me. Got 'em. Here I'm using some super glue to repair a broken thorn. I sanded it, painted it, and then I was done. And that's it, besties. She's all done. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this entire How I Painted It video. I hope all 8 of you learned some really helpful tips. Goodbye.